Great. Well, thanks so much for joining. This is our third installation of our negotiation series. Next time will be our last actual session together, but I really hope that you're learning a lot and will continue to kind of invest in these skills from here. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to dive into market value a bit, talk about, what is it, how to think about it, remind you around some things in terms of being somewhat well-positioned when you think about crafting that ask. I think the bulk of, what we'll spend some time on is going to be case studies, where I'm actually going to walk you through real negotiations that I've executed in various realms. And so not just comp, that of course is covered as well. And then, talking about some other concepts like what happens if. So, the whole name of the game is being prepared. And I don't just want you practicing the crap out of your ask, but I want you thinking through what are the scenarios that could happen, what will you do? And then finally, of course, close on exercises. So remember, you can always go back to that series landing page. I'm dropping recordings, I'm dropping other resources there, books we mentioned. I'm actually going to drop some additional information out of today's session, including the actual language I used in one of my negotiations. Just to give you a little bit more, that you can kind of reference and feel like, even if you want to copy some of the language, completely up to you. You can start from scratch, but I want to give you as much as I can to get you, in a good position to move forward. So let's talk about market value. What is the market value of the thing that you're negotiating on? You need to do the research. And so I reminded you, or I mentioned, in the homework last time in the exercises, do the homework, do the digging. Because if you don't know the market value, you're not in a great position to negotiate, right? If we don't have the knowledge of what is the thing worth, or what is your thing worth, or what do you want, you're not going to be able to ultimately navigate the ask, craft the numbers, be reasonable, but, firm. You just won't have the confidence. And so coming up with what is the market value, or what is the value, even if it's not market value, depending on the scenario, allows you to not only have confidence but to really navigate this thing with excellence. And so one of the questions, could be, what is the market saying, right? What are people paying, or what are they getting paid? Where is this thing transacting? So in the case of, buying a home, it's where are the transactions? Where are the comps? Where are these others valuing it? And depending on what the thing is, supply and demand can be a part of it, but not always. But just, you want to think through the dynamics, right? How confident are you that that is the market value? And sometimes it's conversations, right? It's not always easy to uncover this stuff. It could be, I'm going to have conversations with 3 recruiters, or a recruiter and a mentor and a colleague, to get to whatever the value is, right? It really does require some legwork. But not only do I want you thinking about that market value, but as we talked about before, where do you value it, right? What do you want to pay, or what do you want to earn? So you really want to spend time on that. And digging a little bit deeper around, what are we doing, and how are we going to end up in a place where you feel really good? You need to ask yourself and really make sure you did the digging, not just around market value, but what are you aiming for? And so I love that, whenever I work with somebody one-on-one around negotiations, out of it, they say, I earned these new skills. I learned how to do these things. And even if they didn't know going into it, I want to learn this, it can be a huge takeaway. But ask yourself, right? What do you want to get out of this? And it could just be learning. It could be experimentation. But figure out, right, what are you aiming for? It could be getting to that fair market value. You could have done the digging, done the research, and say, you know what? I'm just not getting paid what others are getting paid. Or I'm not getting paid where I feel good. Or I need a promotion. I need buy-in right in the workforce. And so I think the name of the game is, we want to get you confident in whatever outcome you get to. But if you haven't been intentional, and if you haven't done the digging and the work up front, it's going to be really hard to get to a place you're going to feel good about. You're not going to know how to navigate to get there. And some reminders, in terms of what are you asking for? How are you asking for it? Is there's so many strategies, human biases, so many things that you can do to tip a negotiation or an ask in your favor. And I've mentioned this book before and I love it. And I mention it also on the website. On your landing page, you can click to, books we like, but Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a dense read. It's a lot of material, but it's so fascinating. And it talks about these things like anchoring, these concepts of, well, when you throw out a number, it's going to, the negotiation is going to pull to that number. You want to be realistic, but you want to anchor it, right? You want to lead with something that you feel really good about. There's a lot of biases. We talked a little bit about them before, but there's so many out there, these human biases. The other book you can look at is Michael Lewis, The Undoing Project. And it's basically, call it a watered down version. It's fun to read. It's easier to read, but it still covers a lot of the things in the Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, but it's going to be much easier to read. So you may want to start with the Michael Lewis Undoing Project, learn about biases, learn about these things if they sound interesting. And it's not just about negotiation. Honestly, this stuff is so great for just being better in business and understanding a bit about your brain, right? How do humans interact and work and what's happening? How come you feel worse when you lose $100 than the good you feel when you win $100? There's all these biases that have been studied and proven. It's just really interesting content. Okay, crafting the ask, back to this. What are the levers? We've talked about this a little bit, but it's huge. There are so many things that you can dig into, no matter what the negotiation or ask is, right? And if it's a job, we talked about it earlier on, it's not just comp, right? You can break down comp. Comp can be cash base, cash bonuses, equity, role, title, reporting lines, time off. There's so many levers, each of these things. And so you may realize, hey, you know what? I'm unable to push this lever, but I have this other lever I can use. So being thoughtful and thinking through what are the levers. Again, we'll get into the case studies, but as an example, another example of levers, when I bought my home, when I'm putting in offers, there's different ways to craft the offer. So you might have an escalation clause, you may have a cap, you may say, hey, I'm good with, basic inspection flaws, but not fundamental issues in the home, the foundation. So you really want to get knowledgeable on what is that thing that you are negotiating and asking. And it's not like it's always easy to find, right? When I was buying my home, working with an intelligent broker who was knowledgeable, and I ask these things and I say, hey, how can we have a really standout offer? There's so much demand, so much demand in terms of, every one of these houses is getting a bunch of offers. How can I stand out in my offer? And it's be quick, make sure that you're adding these things that incentivize the seller to want to work with you. Okay. Now we're going to spend a good amount of time on case studies. And I just want to remind you, you are more than welcome to drop questions in the chat. You can come off mute. If you have a question, I guarantee you somebody else has the question. But we have about 4 case studies or so, and it's completely different realms, each one. So I'm going to walk through them. I'm going to tell you these are actually things that happened. And if you have questions, again, you are more than welcome to chime in. So the first time I got a really big raise with an employer, it was a number of years ago. And, I basically had gotten to the point in my career where I said, hey, I am the top producer, on this sales team. And I know they're not paying me my market value. Recruiters would reach out. I finally started talking to some recruiters. I had offers away, meaning, employers actually were saying, great, here's an offer letter, like come work with us. And I knew that I wanted to address it with my employer. And I wanted to say, hey, I'm really good here, but what can they do for me? And so making sure that you do the legwork to say, okay, well, what is the market value, right? What should I be getting paid? And then communicating it through the right channels. So I went through my manager, and then we had a conversation with his manager, had a conversation with that manager, and really brought it to kind of the top of the business. Because at the end of the day, I was such a big producer and they didn't want to lose me. And they had to escalate it because guess what? My manager couldn't give the approval for the type of raise I was asking for. And what was I asking for? I asked for an overall increase, pretty massive increase in terms of my overall total comp, which included my base and my bonus. It ultimately, and I'll get to the outcome later, but it ultimately, was a situation or was an ask that I had a ton of confidence around because I had a backup plan. I had an offer away. And it was an offer away where literally it's on the table. They say, hey, Natalie, we'll give you XYZ. We're so excited to hire you. And when you have a backup offer, the confidence that you have when you're asking for more at your employer, it's basically infinite. And I don't want to say it's infinite. You still want to be careful. You want to, be kind and professional. And you don't want to basically say, hey, I need this thing or I'm walking. But by having that offer away, you're going to have more confidence. And you're going to truly know and feel like you can make the right decision for yourself, whether it's about money, authority, role, all these things. But you're not just stuck with your current employer. And if they say no, you're not just kind of, oh, I asked this thing, they didn't do it, I couldn't walk away, and now I'm still here. Because that's not going to feel good. So I'm a huge fan of, doing the legwork, figuring out what else is out there, but maybe pursuing it as a part of this investigation of, do you want to stay with your current employer? So when you've done all that work and you've asked yourself, what do you really need? When you make the ask, you need to hold firm on it. So when I was finally sitting down with, the head of the head of the head, of the division, and he said, what do you need? I'd done the legwork, so I knew the number. And I had the backup offer, so I was confident. So I could say, hey, you know what? I'm going to need $300,000 to $350,000. Mic drop, right? Pause. And that's what I asked for. And the response, we'll get into that. But the point is, feel really good about what you're asking for. Dig into what you really need and want. And when I communicated this thing, I didn't just say, hey, give me a 43% pay raise. I communicated effectively. And that organization actually was really good about having leaderboards or basically real-time analytics into who was performing. And I communicated, not only am I the number one producer across all of your salespeople in this division of, hundreds of individuals, but I've already crushed my annual targets and we're 7 months into the year. So again, there's numbers around this, right? I don't have this in the back of my head because I didn't necessarily write it down. And this was years ago, but it was something on the order of, I'd closed 1.2 million in new business. My target was, 1.1. And we're only about halfway through the year. And so being able to communicate and articulate what you're really bringing in terms of value. I also communicated I wanted a bigger role, that I didn't just want things to be easy. I was excited to excel and to grow in my career. And so in that room, not only was I ultimately, communicating that I needed a much higher pay, but I was also communicating I wanted a bigger role. And all of it was really well received. So let's talk about the outcome. I'm talking to, 3 levels above me. This individual ultimately has to go to the top of the organization. Gets approval. But the point is, of this story is it wasn't necessarily a, hey, I need more money or I'm walking, It's also reinforcing what is the value, What are you bringing to the team? And them buying in and saying, Natalie, we so appreciate you. We know you bring so much value and we want you to become a senior leader here, and them investing in me to do that. I earned respect. I earned, a whole new sense of kind of what I was doing in my role. I also got pretty massive pay bumps for my manager and then some of my high-performing colleagues, which I felt good about because they all had kids. I didn't, and I still don't. But the point was, I did this thing that nobody had done. And when I initially asked for it and I threw out the number, the response was, we don't do pay raises like that. I don't think that's going to work, but I'll ask. And they got it. I got it. Now, the last bullet point on this slide was ultimately, I did accept it. I turned away the other offer. But guess what? Money alone, not fulfillment. And a few months later, I think it was probably a handful of months later, I basically got to the point where I said, you know what? I'm not being challenged. And it wasn't just the money. I wasn't that excited about the business. And so I ended up moving on. But I moved on and I had a higher pay going into moving on. And when I went to the other business, which was a growth business, it was smaller, it was earlier stage, I ended up negotiating things because guess what? I was walking away from a role where now I was making, over 300,000. And even though they couldn't pay me that because they're a growth company, I was able to navigate and negotiate bonusing around financing closes, around deal closes. I was able to negotiate, a bigger equity chunk because I showed, hey, this is my proven track record. This is what I've done. And, the caliber of what I've brought as a sales producer. If you want me at your business, I need something. And if you can't compensate me with cash, and the saying is cash is king because you want cash if you can, then give me the equity. And I negotiated 1% equity in a business that had already raised, I think it was $12 million at the time. Might have been 18, but the point was it was already a substantial business. And even though they were early, 1% of the business was a lot. And then later I got a check for a few checks that added up to about 400,000. Not that that always happens, but the point is I negotiated and I asked for things and I knew what the levers were and I held out for what I needed. All right, so that was the compensation example. Now let's talk about advisory. So I've been really excited about building my path in advisory work, being an advisor, being on boards. And it's a very opaque market, meaning, you don't look at a published survey and say, oh, this is what all the advisors are making. You could say that about salary as well, but I would say advisory comp, private market, equity, these are concepts that really are, how do I say, it's that much harder to figure out what is the market value. There's so many factors. And I think part of it, why it's hard to know, well, what's the value? What's the market value is there's so many factors that influence, how to think about, say, valuing a business or what a business can pay. And an advisor is a little bit different than, somebody who, let's say, works, full-time or part-time at the business and has pipeline, as an example, if we're talking about sales. So factors to think about, right? The size of the business, the stage of the business, do they have financing? What is the value in the experience you bring as an advisor or a board member? How many hours are you expected to put in or dedicating? And when you think about levers, again, what can you change? What can you ask for? If we're talking about equity, there's many things. So what is vesting? Vesting is basically, if somebody says, if your employer says, great, congratulations, we're bringing you on, we're giving you 10 basis points or 1% in the business, they're not giving that to you immediately because as an employee, you need to add value to earn it. Investing means you basically are earning it over a period of time, over a vesting schedule. So that vesting schedule, which is composed of a few things, a cliff, meaning you have to participate at that business for maybe a year before you start earning any equity. That's a part of it. As an advisor, you may also have, cash comp. Something to think about when you're negotiating or when you're asking for something, it could even be if you're closing a deal, is think about options, because options allow the other person to feel like they have, they're in charge of, or they can make the best selection for them. You can determine or craft the options in such a way where you can drive for what you want. So when I created options and basically said, hey, I'm really excited to work with you in this advisory capacity, I basically said to them, hey, here's one level of equity and one cash comp, opportunity. Or if you want to give me more equity, I'll take less cash comp. Again, I'll publish this so you can actually see the language I used. But the point is knowing what are your levers and what do you want to push towards. But by giving options, you're giving the other party a sense of control where they can choose what's best for their scenario. The other piece I put on this slide was a two-way interview. Because if you're stepping into a new role, an advisory position, board seat, whatever it is, new employer, you want to make sure you're learning throughout. And we've talked about this, but you don't just want to basically push to something and say, okay, great, we figured it out. You want to make sure you want to work with them or work there, and there's learning that happens throughout this interview process or this negotiation process. Okay, so I talked a little bit about some of this on the previous slide, but basically what happened was I shared with this, this company, the founder, I said, here's my proposal. They asked me to send a proposal once they agreed that they wanted to work with me. They wanted to know, what am I valuing? What am I asking for myself? And they reviewed it. And then they got back to me and said, you know what, this is a standard proposal that we've seen for advisors. And I looked at it. And because I know enough about my market value and valuations of businesses, it was way too conservative. And I didn't say, hey, this is crap. And I didn't say, hey, I'll take this because that's what you're offering. I looked at it. I was intentional. I was thoughtful. And I gave feedback on what they shared. And then I updated my proposal. We ultimately agreed on something. And we agreed on something that is a mix of, and thinking about all the different levers, it's a mix of both equity, and it's a little bit more equity and a little bit lower on the cash comp, but it's a more aggressive vesting schedule than they initially proposed. And so knowing what I wanted and being able to target that, and again, not, kind of runway them over, I'm listening to them, but I'm educating them as well around, well, with your stage of business and what I do, this is what I can offer. And we agreed on something that was mutually beneficial. And so ultimately, and I will share again, the language around this, I'm getting 50 basis points, which means 0.5% of the business. So again, some of these terms, I realize it's jargon, it's investing, it may be confusing, but listen, you can re-listen to this, you can rewatch, you can ask questions. It's great to know not just how to navigate something like cash comp or benefits, but equity compensation truly can be a game changer. Think of it as a lottery ticket. If you can get it, and if it's something that feels relatively cheap for a company to give away, and it's something that you can just have, why not try to get this thing? You also want to understand enough about a business to say, do I bank that I think anything, that this equity is going to be worth anything? Because guess what? I don't want equity comp unless I really believe in the business. But again, think of it as, kind of these lottery tickets. And if you have a really small amount of equity comp, it's probably not going to do much, even if the company goes big. So digging in to actually understand with equity comp, not shares. I don't care about shares. I care about percentage ownership. And the way to think about valuation is if you just valued your business at $10 million, and then you're offering me, 1% or 0.25%, you can calculate the actual market value based on that last valuation. So there are ways to come up with what is the value. But again, it's illiquid, there may never be an exit. The company may, do nothing, but these are really good concepts to think about because again, equity is something that can be really valuable. I'm an investor. And so I'm an advocate for, understanding it, getting more women into investing. But anyway, just a little bit of thought there. Okay, another negotiation, my lease in Denver. I moved to Denver and I looked at the market and I looked at places and, to really understand the market when we're talking about real estate, leasing, buying, you want to look at a number of properties. You want to look at a number of rentals and listings because you can't really get a pulse. You can't really know the market dynamics unless you look at a few places. And also you want to find the one you want to live in, right? So I did my homework. I knew the levers, or I looked at, what are the levers? And I had options. What do I mean by options? There were other places I liked. You're always in a better position when you're not just in love with or just have that one thing, that one apartment or that one job, right? You're in a better position when you have options. So I found one and I said, wow, I love it. I could definitely be here. So I'm going to walk through, I guess, the scenario of this. But the last bullet on this slide is, we're not just talking about negotiating the upfront lease, but I also negotiated the renewal. So we'll talk about that as well. So basically, I knew that this building was not fully leased. It was a nice new build, not condo, lease building, apartment building. And I knew that it wasn't fully leased. Some of the really nice penthouse spaces, one of which I fell in love with, they couldn't rent them. Maybe it was priced too high. It was a weird time in the market. The point was they were offering incentives. They offered a 13-month lease for 12 months, meaning 1 month free, because they were trying to basically fully occupy this building that they'd put up and had been around for less than a year, and they needed to rent out these units. So knowing the dynamics going in, right? They're having trouble renting the nicest units. And I want one of the nicest units. I got upsold, but it was beautiful. And so what I did was, I knew, because of the research I'd done, knowing that they really wanted to rent this, I knew that I could ask for further discounting and not just be excited about the 1 month free. Because guess what? It's sitting on the market. It's sitting there. It's sitting inventory. And so I negotiated additional discounting. And I learned from, working with them that there were certain things they could negotiate and certain things that they could not. So I basically negotiated on price, where there were certain things, like a certain, price point where they just really wouldn't do it. I think I ultimately actually got 6 months free, not the month. So the effective, kind of monthly pricing was way lower than where they had it listed. I'll give you numbers again, because I think numbers really help, right? It starts saying, well, what did she do? And what did she actually get? And I paid a lot. So don't think you need to pay these prices. I'm just going to share with you so you know the actual numbers. They wanted, for this penthouse, $4,650 a month. I got it for $4,200 a month, but with that 6 weeks free, it was effectively below $4,000 a month. So again, it's not like I'm getting half off, right? But it is a substantial amount that I'm saving and paying, but saving. And what was interesting about negotiating with this team, they would always say, oh no, we absolutely can't do it. And then we got there, right? We ultimately got there. I said, well, just show it. Just show this to, the owners, show it to the investors. And then they would get it done. And when I was leaving the building, there were 3 weeks where I was going to have 2 leases. And I said to them ahead of moving, I said, hey, I'm moving out, before the month end. If it works, I'd be happy to give you the apartment sooner and basically get some credit back on, the lease. And they said, absolutely not. We'll never do that. Guess what happened? They came back to me a week later and said, oh, we have somebody, they want your apartment. Not only will we give you back, the credit of 2 weeks you asked for, we'll give you 3. Great. If I never put myself out there, if I never asked for the thing, and I wasn't crazy about it, I just said, hey, if this is a possibility. By the way, I didn't just say this is a possibility. There were some things that happened in the building that were not fun. And so I basically said, given some of these, issues, and I am leaving, I'd really appreciate. So it was a little bit stronger when I initially asked. And they said, we'll never do that. And then they gave me 3 weeks credit not to. So again, what are we learning, right? By choosing to enter into or let somebody know you want to negotiate or transact, right? Then you can be in play. Okay, buying a home. So I think this is the last of the case studies, but let's talk a little bit about home buying. Again, doing the homework, getting a pulse. What are the levers? What is a competitive offer? And again, you want to probably work with a broker that you feel confident in, that they understand how to put together a competitive offer. A broker who understands and can add some insight into, where are the transactions? Where are the comps? How should I think about the offer here? But doing the homework isn't just, looking and seeing at the listings. It's saying, okay, is stuff flying off the market? Are they getting a bunch of cash offers? How are things transacting? to really, become knowledgeable, it's digging in, and it's not just looking at, oh, and that's where the house ultimately transacted. What happened, right? What did the offers look like? So in doing the homework and in looking for a home myself, I mentioned this, I think, before, but I ultimately had 7 different offers that I had made at various stages throughout my housing search. And housing is a little bit different because I'd said the thing about supply and demand, and some markets are efficient, and housing isn't always efficient, meaning there is this timing component, right? It's a big purchase, it's a big transaction. So it might be a little bit luck of, you just staying after and finding the right place, the right inventory, being there at the right time. And people also can be motivated by things like, timing or a move, or, they could fall in love with something and basically not care about market value. So housing is a little bit different. But you're not going to be able to ultimately get a price you feel good about or feel like you've done the legwork unless you really invest the time to look at the inventory, get up to speed on, what's happening in this market. And also understanding dynamics like momentum. I've shared this before, but making sure there's momentum so that you're putting out an offer, or, you have something going back and forth with the seller's broker, and make sure they know, I'm interested, I want to transact, don't go quiet for a week. If it's a hot market, like, stay after it. Momentum really does, win and kill these deals, all deals. But ultimately, by having, the various options, not just the 7 offers I looked at and put out there, over a span of months, but ultimately having, the house that I now own and live in, where you're watching me right now in this video, but having a few others that I really liked as well, it put me in a good position where I wasn't going to totally blow myself out of the water and say, I'm going to overpay, right? Because you don't want to do that. So ultimately, there were 3 properties I was kind of in between. And I read the situation. So I'll tell you exactly what happened with my current home. It had been on the market. It was under contract. I only viewed it after it was already under contract. So I didn't even look at it when it was initially on the market. I looked at it and said, wow, it's under contract, but I think it looks really interesting. And luck of the draw, and I guess there's some percentage of, offers that fall through. The initial offer fell through. Buyer walked away. Wow. Okay. So dynamics are, you have this seller where their first offer didn't work out. That doesn't look good for them. So I'm in a good position to, put an offer on this home. And how do I want to put the offer in? The house was listed for $865. I asked and tried to get information to understand where the offer that fell through was. And my specific question was, where was it under contract? And their broker wouldn't tell me, but said below the list price. So I knew it's below $865, but I didn't know the price. So here I am knowing the market's hot, people are buying homes so quickly, but also recognizing that this house just fell through contract. They want to sell it. The seller's broker told me it went for below what the offer was. So I thought about it. I went back and forth, went through my broker and said, let's do $850. Let's offer $850. Again, this is not, it's not something where I can say, hey, it always works this way. I'm just sharing numbers so you know what I did. We thought that it was aggressive enough, but we don't want to overpay. We know they just fell out of contract. So guess what? They accepted the offer. Great, exciting, right? But that's only a part of it. Part of it was I'd asked, okay, well, what happened? Why did the other offer fall through? And I think they were a little cagey, right? They didn't give us great information. But ultimately, when we went through the inspection report came back and it wasn't great. You always want to do that inspection, right? It's a part of the home buying process. So I got high-end estimates, meaning conservative, meaning I don't want to have to pay more than they're telling me. I want to know high end, right? What does it cost to replace and do these things based on the inspection report? And the contractor came back and said, it's going to be about $20,000. Actually, he said 15,000. And so then I renegotiated and I said, okay, you know what? The 850, it just doesn't feel good because there's these issues. I don't think they were totally honest about, why the previous offer fell through. This furnace, wasn't even working, needed a whole replacement. Anyway, I went in and I got to renegotiate a $20,000 credit. So instead of that 850, now we're talking 830 because I have to put, 15, 18 grand into the home. And by the way, it wasn't easy. When I tried to renegotiate after the inspection, the seller was not thrilled. But I was not thrilled, and I know that this seller doesn't want his second offer to fall through. Does not look good. Okay, so again, I'm hoping by sharing some real numbers, it's starting to get you feeling, some sense of I'm not being crazy and egregious. And there's a reason I'm asking for the numbers I'm asking for. But they're real, it's real value, right? They initially listed the home at $899 and wow, I got it for $830. And all my neighbors were like, we can't believe, where the home transacted, like good for you, and it makes you feel better about the value, about what you're getting. But it was a little bit of legwork. Okay. So I have a slide here that just kind of reminds you when we're talking about employer equity comp, which we chatted about a little bit ago, things to remember and consider, because again, equity comp is something that can be more complex and tougher to negotiate on. So, just some ideas for you to think about. So in terms of thinking about, what are you asking for? You want to go through that list of questions. You want to go through and do all the digging we talked about before. Basically understand what's driving you, right? What's driving the thing or the ask? Is it that you don't want to leave money on the table? Are you looking for a new role ultimately? Do you want to up-level your comp package? Do you want to, get an equity package? Maybe you don't have equity in the business and you deserve it, or you believe that you deserve it. There's so many things, that you could be looking for here, but until you do that work to dig into what do you need, what do you want, what are you looking for, there's no way to negotiate to it, because unless you do the work and what do you really need, what are you going to ask for? And so I'm going to spend just a second, on probable scenarios, which is what could happen and what will you do? Because when you have a plan or you've thought through and if this happens, this is how I would respond, you're going to be in that much more of a thoughtful position. So if they don't meet you, or if you ask for, if you're asking for 120,000 and they're only going to bring you to 110, what are you going to do? So know not just what you're going to ask for, but know what you actually really need to say yes. And I'm not saying you want to agree on the spot. You always want to sleep on it, but know, right? Know in these different scenarios, what would you do? What if they won't budge at all? What if they say, hey, you know what? We appreciate it. We know that other companies are paying more, but we just can't do that. Maybe you could ask for equity, right? Maybe there's another lever, but if they really can't, what are you going to do? And you can think through this stuff during the negotiation, but I'm just a huge fan of how can you prepare as much as possible before it happens? And remember, there's so much to learn, throughout the experience. So it could just be the confidence in, making the ask and articulating your value. There's so much to learn, in terms of if you get to know, or, you get to push back, what do you do? Like, how are you navigating and growing through the obstacle? There's so much you can learn just by dancing, basically the back and forth, if you're open to it. And a huge part of this, in a way to really make yourself stand out, whether you are, a practitioner, or, you're a new employee, or you're an existing employee, is keep reminding them why they want to work with you. You don't just want to be combative, right? You're a team player. You add really good value. You're excited about the culture. Remind and reinforce these things. By showing them you can negotiate or ask for something with confidence and show up as a real professional, they may look at you in a new light and say, wow, you know what? I don't want you in that role. I actually want you in a bigger role. Awesome. And make sure they pay you for it. You don't just want to get, the title change. You want to make sure you're getting paid for it. And so, out of today, we want you now thinking about crafting that ask, and not just thinking about your value and the way that you articulate value, but really, what are you going to ask for? What are the numbers? And how do you include and cover, all these different pieces to make sure that you're reinforcing the value, showing, this is why you need what, and articulating all the things. And what's the actual ask? And so here's an example. It builds on, our prior example. Through my leadership and execution of our Trade Show Colorado campaign, the business brought in 50,000 of new deals in Q4 and has an additional 120,000 of new pipeline. I'm looking to increase my comp package with the business to 120,000 to reflect my market value and the value I bring to the team. I have an offer away, but really appreciate the culture and opportunity with ABC Company and would really like to continue to invest in my career with you if you're open to this new compensation range. So get it, I'm not just saying, hey, I need 120,000, which let's pretend you were making 90. I'm reinforcing the value, what I've brought. And by the way, there's a lot more you could do here. I'm just giving you an example, but knowing, right, what is the superpower, right? What are the things that you bring to the business, the skills, what you're really, really good at? That all is really important because the conversation may not stop with the ask. This manager or this person may say, let's talk a little bit more about, your performance and what you are best at. I want you to be really skilled and to really know what you bring. Your skills, your value. And so that's kind of the bulk of what we're going to cover today. In terms of what's next, I want you getting more strategic and thoughtful with, and what does the groundwork look like? How are we going to prepare for the execution? And so next time, we're going to talk a little bit more about, role playing, getting into the headspace. But the homework this week, I want you to get that ask down. I want actual numbers. I want you to think about the levers. What are all the different levers? I don't just want numbers. I don't just want, if we're talking about compensation, I don't just want your base comp, but I want other things included in the ask. I want it to be thoughtful. Again, you can think about things like, if you're stepping away from a 401k plan, or, you're stepping away from something that has real value, you can bake that into, the new offer. Maybe the new offer or the new place doesn't have a 401k. So ask for more cash. That's okay. I want you to be thoughtful. I want you to think about value positioning, not just talking about the numbers. You need to bake that in. And I also want you thinking about those probable scenarios. So what happens if? What happens if you want to charge, $500 an hour for your design services and somebody only wants to pay $200 an hour? Will you take them as an early client for a testimonial? Or are you going to hold firm at 400? What is the plan? Think about it. So that's what I've got for today. Thank you, Julia, for your kind note in the chat. I love that. You all were quiet. So was it the case studies? Was it too much? Was it a little complex? Did you learn a little bit? Feel free to speak up. You also don't have to, and you're welcome to drop things in the chat if you like.
Hi, Natalie. I was just kind of curious about when is the appropriate time to ask for a raise, like how many years of the company? And I know that can be contingent on a number of different things, like how much value you're adding and your overall performance. But like minimum, do you have like an estimate?
No, it's a great question. So I would say there's the idea of an annual raise. And, you can think about it like, there's inflation usually in the market, or, every company, every year over year, you're going to add more value to the company. You're learning more, you're more valuable to them. There should be some type of bonus that happens every year, but I also want to see an actual raise every year. The way I think about it though, is if you really want to own your journey, it's not just being passive and saying thanks for the few $100s or $1,000, but it's actually taking your destiny in your hands and saying, nope, I did the work and, I did the research and I'm a highly valuable employee, assuming you are, and getting a bigger raise. And so you can own the process, but you also want to understand and navigate. And we'll talk about this a little bit next time, but what are the constraints within the organization? So some organizations only may be able to do bonusing around year end based on how they operate. And that's okay. But you don't want to miss that window, right? You want to be educated and know enough of how are you going to tackle this thing. And so, listen, I would say for early employees, or I should say, sorry, more junior employees, if you're in a more junior role, if you're really growing quickly, I think that big step up bonusing is possible as you show competency and as you scale up, because junior employees really are paid at more junior levels. Whereas if you're more of kind of been performing for a while, and you're doing pretty well, but you're not blowing numbers out of the water, like I can't see you doing a really big step up. So I don't know, there's so many scenarios, so many things we could talk about, but I think if you're growing in your role, if you're growing into a new role, or just that annual kind of review process, there's kind of a natural inclination to talk about, compensation adjustments then.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is you can always create a time to talk about it if you get an offer away, so you don't want to be crazy about it, but it could be any time during the year. And if another company approaches you or you were proactive and found another offer, I mean, you can have the conversation whenever you need to. And employers may say to you, hey, it's pretty tough to do this thing, but listen, if you need it, they're going to get it done if you ultimately add value to the business. Great question. Anybody else? I threw a lot of numbers at you. I know this. So hopefully, again, it was, something that could teach you something, but the name of the game is, if I didn't ask for these things, maybe I wouldn't have done, lived in the nice penthouse because I wouldn't have gotten, the discount that I ultimately negotiated or whatever. I mean, it's what do you want? What do you want to get out of this thing? But just by choosing to enter into the ask, you're just in a much better position to ultimately get what you want. So I think that's kind of the underlying, thing that I've seen for my negotiations. And some people really don't like negotiations, and they also don't like I don't know, how do I say? They don't want to be seen as somebody who negotiates. Again, I'm not every time I have a conversation saying, ooh, I need this thing. But when there is a big transaction or something that does cost a lot, I want to feel really good about, well, what price am I getting? So I think with that, everybody's on mute. I will pause it for today. Please, listen along to the homework. I will make that information accessible so you can actually see the ask that I had for the advisory role. I'll show you the back and forth, and you can see ultimately how I crafted the offer and what we agreed on. But if you have any questions, I hope you'll speak up, and thanks again for participating today.